Welcome to the Property Corner with myself, Rowan Alexander. So it's been a while since we posted an updated episode. Today we're going to be covering distressed sales and how we're seeing them rising in South Africa at the moment. So Lightstone have published a report in October this year detailing the fact that distressed sales are on the rise in South Africa. So their latest data looks back to May 2023, comparing it to May 2022. And the distressed sales figures are up to 3.7% of all property sales, whereas in 2022, this figure was down at 2%. So it's nearly doubled in volume, the amount of distressed sales. It's become harder to measure distressed sales, but I think Lightstone have come up with a pretty good way to actually try and cut through the information and identify distressed sales and possible motivators for distressed sales. This rise in the distressed sales volume indicates that purchasers or property owners are struggling to make ends meet and are being put under financial pressure and making early decisions to sell homes. So in the past, there was a very easy way to measure the amount of sales and execution. Notices were published in government gazettes, and you could easily track the volumes of sales and execution. Today, banks have put a number of processes in place, like the Help You Sell and the Sales Assist programs, where they help consumers sell their homes prior to actually getting into default and legal action being taken. While this is good for the consumer, it becomes really hard to report on and to get accurate information out there. I think this has been a process which has benefited all consumers because it's helped them avoid losses as well as the bank. If they're avoiding going to a distressed sale auction, the banks have to write off less debt, and consumers who have become indebted have less of a debt burden upon the property actually selling. In an attempt to determine whether distressed sales are rising or not, Lightstone has used the deeds office information to look at properties that are sold within 2 years of purchases where there have been bonds involved. And there's been some interesting information that's come out since they've released this report, especially if you look back at the period from, say, mid-2020 up until the end of 2021, when interest rates were really at their lowest, and it allowed for the opportunity for purchasers to actually enter the market at, let's call it, subsidized interest rates. But this has also created the circumstance where many buyers overstretched their budgets and actually bought beyond their means. And these are the figures that Lightstone is trying to identify and accepting as buyers in distress. We as agents can confirm this. We've seen it too, where people have bought properties and not anticipating that the interest rates would rise until a point where they are now. But not only interest rates, the rising costs of living, fuel, food in South Africa currently are high. And this has put more pressure on property mortgage repayments than what they have had in the past. So it's not just the interest rate, but just that rising cost of living. So in addition to the circumstances where people are buying and then reselling within 2 years, Lightstone have identified another measure which should give us some insights into buying trends. And that is the loan to value and the number of bonds that people are applying for. And if you look at May 2022 compared to May 2023, for every 100 properties that would have sold in 2022, 60 of these would have had mortgage bonds. If you compare it to 2023, we're only seeing half those sales volumes. And again, the mortgage bond application rate has decreased too. So to give you that in percentages, the number of purchases have halved since May 2022. And only 40% of buyers are bonding their properties compared to 60% in 2022. Now, percentages could become deceiving, and that's why we like to give you these figures in actual volumes to make sense of them. So there would have been 60 bonds for 100 sales in 2022. But now in 2023, there are only 50 sales and 20 bonds. So forget what that means in percentages. Just look at the volume and the rand value effect that would have. The residential property market is certainly feeling that, especially in the lower pricing segments. So having established that bond volumes are down, Lightstone then looked at how many of these purchases were actually reselling within a 2-year period compared to previous years, and labeling these as distressed sales. Now, while there may be a lot of people who purchased opportunistically and are reselling, we can confirm that when someone's typically selling within 2 years now, it is usually because of financial pressure. So when comparing previous cycles to the last cycle of 2021 to 2023, we can see that the amount of people selling their homes within 2 years is up by 80%. The only explanation that can be had for this is that people are unable to afford properties that they bought during the low cost cycle. Again, we need to re-emphasize that it's not just the interest rate, it's the rising costs of living that have greatly contributed to people being under pressure for selling their homes. I think the way that Lightstone have gone about this is pretty good, and I like the way in which they're reporting it. We'll post the link to the report in the description below. MoneyWeb have recently come out with an article stating that the banking ombudsman has sounded the alarm on higher car repossession complaints in South Africa too. And it would be interesting to see if the motor vehicle trade is experiencing the same sort of trends as we are in the residential property market. And if you are a property owner and you find yourself in distress, we'll be chatting about some ways in which you could potentially avoid getting to the point of having a sale and execution. So stay tuned to our next episode where we'll be providing more insights and information into refinancing, renegotiating your interest rates and loan, which may just give you some more breathing space to avoid finding yourself in a sale and execution, or to provide for enough time for you to sell your house in an open market.